Hello again, and welcome back to another session of Sister for Sister Story Time with your favorite sister, ChayaFyah, the historian. Back reading the Secret Teachings of All Ages. Current chapter is Flowers, Plants, Fruits, and Trees. You can get the book in the description box. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start reading. The Yoni and phallus were worshipped by nearly all ancient peoples as appropriate symbols of God's creative power. The Garden of Eden, the Ark, the Gate of the Temple, the Veil of the Mysteries, the Vesica Piscis or oval nimbus, and the Holy Grail are important Yonic symbols. The pyramid, the obelisk, the cone, the candle, the tower, the Celtic monolith, the spire, the campanile, the maypole, and the sacred spear are symbolic of the phallus. In treating the subject of Priapic worship, too many modern authors judge pagan standards by their own and wallow in the mire of self created vulgarity. The Eleusinian mysteries, the greatest of all the ancient secret societies, established one of the highest known standards of morality and ethics, and those criticizing their use of phallic symbols should ponder the trenchant words of King Edward III, Honi soit qui male pense. The obscene rites practiced by the later Bacchanalia and Dionysia were no more representative of the standards of purity originally upheld by the mysteries than the orgies occasionally occurring among the adherents of Christianity till the 18th century were representative of primitive Christianity. Sir William Hamilton, British minister at the court of Naples, declares that in 1780, Isernia, a community of Christians in Italy, worshipped with phallic ceremonies the pagan god Priapus under the name of Saint Cosmo. See 2 essays on the worship of Priapus by Richard Payne Knight. Father, mother, and child constitute the natural trinity. The mysteries glorified the home as the supreme institution consisting of this trinity functioning as a unit. Pythagoras likened the universe to the family, declaring that as the supreme fire of the universe was in the midst of its heavenly bodies, so by analogy, the supreme fire of the world was upon its hearthstones. The Pythagorean and other schools of philosophy conceived the one divine nature of God to manifest itself in the threefold aspect of father, mother, and child. These three constituted the divine family, whose dwelling place is creation and whose natural and peculiar symbol is the 47th problem of Euclid. God the Father is spirit, God the Mother is matter, and God the Child, the product of the two, represents the sum of living things born out of and constituting nature. The seed of spirit is sown in the womb of matter, and by an immaculate, pure conception, the progeny is brought into being. Is not this the true meaning of the Madonna holding the holy babe in her arms? Who dares to say that such symbolism is improper? The mystery of life is the supreme mystery revealed in all of its divine dignity and glorified as nature's perfect achievement by the initiated sages and seers of all ages. The prudery of today, however, declares this same mystery to be unfit for the consideration of holy minded people. Contrary to the dictates of reason, a standard has been established which affirms that innocence bred of ignorance is more to be desired than virtue born of knowledge. Eventually, however, man will learn that he need never be ashamed of truth. Until he does learn this, he is false to his God, to his world, and to himself. In this respect, Christianity has woefully failed in its mission. While declaring man's body to be the living temple of the living God, in the same breath, it asserts the substances and functions of this temple to be unclean, and their study defiling to the sensitive sentiments of the righteous. By this unwholesome attitude, man's body, the house of God, is degraded and defamed. Yet the cross itself is the oldest of phallic emblems, and the lozenge shaped windows of cathedrals are proof that Ionic symbols have survived the destruction of the pagan mysteries. The very structure of the church itself is permeated with phallicism. Remove from the Christian church all emblems of priapic origin, and nothing is left. For even the earth upon which it stands was, because of its fertility, the first Ionic symbol. As the presence of these emblems of the generative processes is either unknown or unheeded by the majority, the irony of the situation is not generally appreciated. Only those conversant with the secret language of antiquity are capable of understanding the divine significance of these emblems. Flowers were chosen as symbols for many reasons. The great variety of flora made it possible to find some plant or flower which would be a suitable figure for nearly an abstract quality or condition. A plant might be chosen because of some myth connected with its origin, as the stories of Daphne and Narcissus, because of the peculiar environment in which it thrived, as the orchid and the fungus, because of its significant shape, as the passion flower and the eastern lily because of its brilliance or fragrance, as the verbena and the sweet lavender because it preserved its form indefinitely, as the everlasting flower, because of unusual characteristics, as the sunflower and heliotrope, which have long been sacred because of their affinity for the sun. The plant might also be considered worthy of veneration because from its crushed leaves, petals, stalks, or roots could be extracted healing unctions, essences, or drugs affecting the nature and intelligence of human beings, such as the poppy and the ancient herbs of prophecy. The plant might also be regarded as efficacious in the cure of many diseases because its fruit, leaves, petals, or roots bore a resemblance in shape or color to parts or organs of the human body. For example, the distilled juices of certain species of ferns, also the hairy moss growing up on oaks, and the thistledown were said to have the power of growing hair. The dentaria, which resembles a tooth in shape, was said to cure the toothache. And the Palma Christi plant, because of its shape, cured all afflictions of the hands. Sorry. The blossom is really the reproductive system of the plant and is therefore singularly appropriate as a symbol of sexual purity, an absolute requisite of the ancient mysteries. Thus, the flower signifies this ideal of beauty and regeneration, which must ultimately take the place of lust and degeneracy. Of all symbolic flowers, the locust blossom of India and Egypt and the rose of the Rosicrucians are the most important. In their symbolism, these two flowers are considered identical. The esoteric doctrines for which the Eastern lotus stands have been perpetuated in modern Europe under the form of the rose. The rose and the lotus are Ionic emblems, signifying primarily the maternal creative mystery, while the Easter lily is considered to be phallic. The Brahmin and Egyptian initiates, who undoubtedly understood the secret systems of spiritual culture whereby the latent centers of cosmic energy in man may be stimulated, employed the lotus blossoms to represent the spinning vortices of spiritual energy located at various points along the spinal column and called chakras, or whirling wheels by the Hindus. 7 of these chakras are of prime importance and have their individual correspondences in the nerve ganglia and plexuses. According to the secret schools, the sacred ganglion is called the four-petaled lotus, the prostatic plexus, the six-petaled lotus, the epigastric plexus and navel, the 10-petaled lotus, the cardiac plexus, the 12-petaled lotus, the pharyngeal plexus, the 16-petaled lotus, the cavernous plexus, the two-petaled lotus, and the pineal gland or adjacent unknown center, the 1,000-petaled lotus. The color, size, and number of petals upon the lotus are the keys to its symbolic import. A hint concerning the unfoldment of spiritual understanding according to the secret science of the mysteries is found in the story of Aaron's rod that budded, and also in Wagner's great opera, Tannhauser, where the budding staff of the Pope signifies the unfolding blossoms upon the sacred rod of the mysteries, the spinal column. The Tree of the Knights of the Round Table. This remarkable example of the use of the tree in symbolism is from the Chateau de Pierrefonds in the little town of Pierrefonds, northern France. The 8 side branches end in conventional cup-like flowers, from each of which rises the body of a knight carrying in his hand a ribbon bearing his name. The central stem is surmounted by a larger flower, from which emerges the body of King Arthur himself. The tree is a favorite motif in heraldry. The one trunk with its multitude of branches caused the tree to be frequently used in diagramming family lineage, from which practice has arisen the custom of terming such tables family trees. The Rosicrucians used a garland of roses to signify the same spiritual vortices, which are referenced to in the Bible as the 7 lamps of the candlestick and the 7 churches of Asia. In the 1642 edition of Sir Francis Bacon's History of Henry VII is a frontispiece showing Lord Bacon with Rosicrucian roses for shoe buckles. In the Hindu system of philosophy, each petal of the lotus bears a certain symbol, which gives an added clue to the meaning of the flower. The Orientals also used the lotus plant to signify the growth of man through the 3 periods of human consciousness: ignorance, endeavor, and understanding. As the lotus exists in 3 elements, earth, water, and air, so many lives in 3 worlds: material, intellectual, and spiritual. As the plant, with its roots in the mud and the slime, grows upward through the water and finally blossoms forth in the light and air, so the spiritual growth of man is upward from the darkness of base action and desire into the light of truth and understanding. The water serving as a symbol of the ever-changing world of illusion through which the soul must pass in its struggle to reach the state of spiritual illumination. The rose and its Eastern equivalent, the lotus, like all beautiful flowers, represent spiritual unfoldment and attainment. Hence, the Eastern deities are often shown seated upon the open petals of the lotus blossoms. The lotus was also a universal motif in Egyptian art and architecture. The roofs of many temples were upheld by lotus columns, signifying the eternal wisdom, and the lotus-headed scepter, symbolic of self-unfoldment and divine prerogative, was often carried in religious processions. When the flower had 9 petals, it was symbolic of man. When 12 of the universe and the gods, when 7 of the planets and the law, when 5 of the senses and the mysteries, and when 3 of the chief deities and the worlds. The heraldic rose of the Middle Ages generally has either 5 or 10 petals, thereby showing its relationship to the spiritual mystery of man through the Pythagorean pentad and decad. Cultus Arborum. The worship of trees as proxies of divinity was prevalent throughout the ancient world. Temples were often built in the heart of sacred groves, and nocturnal ceremonials were conducted under the wide spreading branches of great trees, fantastically decorated and festooned in honor of their patron deities. In many instances, the trees themselves were believed to possess the attributes of divine power and intelligence, and therefore supplications were often addressed to them. The beauty, dignity, massiveness, and strength of oaks, elms, and cedars led to their adoption as symbols of power, integrity, permanence, virility, and divine protection. Several ancient peoples, notably the Hindus and Scandinavians, regarded the macrocosm or grand universe as a divine tree growing from a single seed sown in space. The Greeks, Persians, Chaldeans, and Japanese have legends describing the axle tree or reed upon which the earth revolves. Kapila declares the universe to be the eternal tree, Brahma, which springs from an imperceptible and intangible seed, the material monad. The medieval Kabbalists represented creation as a tree with its roots in the reality of spirit and its branches in the illusion of tangible existence. The Sephirothic tree of the Kabbalah was therefore inverted, with its roots in heaven and its branches upon the earth. Madame Blavatsky notes that the Great Pyramid was considered to be a symbol of this inverted tree, with its root at the apex of the pyramid and its branches diverging in four streams toward the base. The Scandinavian world tree Yggdrasil supports on its branches 9 spheres or worlds, which the Egyptians symbolized by the 9 stamens of the Persea or avocado. All of these are enclosed within the mysterious 10th sphere or cosmic egg, the definitionless cipher of the mysteries. The Kabbalistic tree of the Jews also consists of 9 branches or worlds emanating from the first cause or crown, which surrounds its emanations as the shell surrounds the egg. The single source of life and the endless diversity of its expression has a perfect analogy in the structure of the tree. The trunk represents the single origin of all diversity. The roots, deeply embedded in the dark earth, are symbolic of divine nutriment, and its multiplicity of branches spreading from the central trunk represent the infinity of universal effects dependent upon a single cause. The tree has also been accepted as symbolic of the microcosm that is man. According to the esoteric doctrine, man first exists potentially within the body of the world tree, and later blossoms forth into objective manifestation upon its branches. According to an early Greek mystery myth, the god Zeus fabricated the third race of men from ash trees. The serpent, so often shown wound around the trunk of the tree, usually signifies the mind, the power of thought, and is the eternal tempter or urge which leads all rational creatures to the ultimate discovery of reality and thus overthrows the rule of the gods. The serpent hidden in the foliage of the universal tree represents the cosmic mind, and in the human tree, the individualized intellect. The concept that all life originates from seeds caused grain and various plants to be accepted as emblematic of the human spermatozoon, and the tree was therefore symbolic of organized life unfolding from its primitive germ. The growth of the universe from its primitive seed may be likened to the growth of the mighty oak from the tiny acorn. While the tree is apparently much greater than its own source, nevertheless, that source contains potentially every branch, twig, and leaf, which will later be objectively unfolded by the processes of growth. Man's veneration for trees as symbols of the abstract qualities of wisdom and integrity also led him to designate as trees those individuals who possessed these divine qualities to an apparently superhuman degree. Highly illumined philosophers and priests were therefore often referred to as trees or tree men. For example, the Druids, whose name, according to one interpretation, signifies the men of the oak trees or the initiates of certain Syrian mysteries, who were called cedars. In fact, it is far more credible and probable that the famous cedars of Lebanon, cut down for the building of King Solomon's temple, were really illumined initiated sages. The mystic knows that the true supports of God's glorious house were not the logs subject to decay, but the immortal and imperishable intellects of the tree hierophants. Trees are repeatedly mentioned in the Old and New Testaments and in the scriptures of various pagan nations. The tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil mentioned in Genesis, the burning bush in which the angel appeared to Moses, the famous vine and fig tree of the New Testament, the grove of olives in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus went to pray, and the miraculous tree of Revelation, which bore 12 manners of fruit and whose leaves were for the healing of the nations, all bear witness to the esteem in which trees were held by the scribes of Holy Writ. Buddha received his illumination while under the Bodhi tree near Madras in India, and several of the Eastern gods are pictured sitting in meditation beneath the spreading branches of mighty trees. Many of the great sages and saviors carried wands, rods, or staves cut from the wood of sacred trees, as the rods of Moses and Aaron, Gungnir, the spear of Odin, cut from the tree of life, and the consecrated rod of Hermes, around which the fighting serpents entwined themselves. The tree of Noah from the Breaches Bible of 1599. Most Bibles published during the Middle Ages contain a section devoted to a genealogical table showing the descents of humanity from Father Adam to the advent of Jesus Christ. The tree growing from the roof of the ark represents the body of Noah and its three branches, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The nations by the descendants of Noah's three sons are appropriately shown in the circles upon the branches of the tree. While each tables are hopelessly incorrect from a historical point of view, to the symbolist, their allegorical interpretations are of inestimable importance. The numerous uses which the ancients made of the tree and its products are factors in its symbolism. Its worship was, to a certain degree, based upon its usefulness. Of this, P. Lundy writes, trees occupy such an important place in the economy of nature by way of attracting and retaining moisture and shading the water sources and the soil so as to prevent barrenness and desolation. And they are so useful to man for shade, for fruit, for medicine, for fuel, for building houses and ships, for furniture, for almost every department of life, that it is no wonder that some of the more conspicuous ones, such as the oak, the pine, the palm, and the sycamore, have been made sacred and used for worship. Under the appellations of the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is concealed the great arcanum of antiquity, the mystery of equilibrium. The tree of life represents the spiritual point of balance, the secret of immortality. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, as its name implies, represents polarity or unbalance, the secret of mortality. The Kabbalists reveal this by assigning the central column of their separate diagram to the tree of life and the two side branches to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Unbalanced forces perish in the void. declares the secret work, and all is made known. The apple represents the knowledge of the procreative processes by the awakening of which the material universe was established. The allegory of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is a cosmic myth, revealing the methods of universal and individual establishment. The literal story, accepted for so many centuries by an unthinking world, is preposterous by the creative mystery of which it is the symbol, is one of nature's profoundest verities. The Ophites, serpent worshippers, revered the Edenic snake because it was the cause of individual existence. Though humanity is still wandering in a world of good and evil, it will ultimately attain completion and eat of the fruit of the tree of life, growing in the midst of the illusionary garden of worldly things. Thus, the tree of life is also the appointed symbol of the mysteries, and by partaking of its fruit, man attains immortality. The oak, the pine, the ash, the cypress, and the palm are the five trees of greatest symbolic importance. The Father God of the mysteries was often worshipped under the form of an oak, the Savior God, frequently the world martyr, in the form of a pine, the world axis and the divine nature in humanity in the form of an ash, the goddesses or maternal principle in the form of a cypress, and the positive pole of generation in the form of the inflorescence of the date palm. The pine cone is a phallic symbol of remote antiquity. The thyrsus of Bacchus, a long wand or staff surmounted by a pine cone or cluster of grapes and entwined with ivy or grapevine leaves, sometimes ribbons, signifies that the wonders of nature may only be accomplished by the aid of solar virility, as symbolized by the cone or grapes. In the Phrygian mysteries, Attis, the ever present sun savior, dies under the branches of the pine tree, an allusion to the solar globe at the winter solstice. And for this reason, the pine tree was sacred to his cult. This tree was also sacred in the mysteries of Dionysus and Apollo. Among the ancient Egyptians and Jews, the acacia or tamarisk was held in the highest religious esteem, and among modern Masons, branches of acacia, cypress, cedar, or evergreen are still regarded as most significant emblems. The shittim wood used by the children of Israel in the construction of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant was a species of acacia. In describing this sacred tree, Albert Pike has written, the genuine acacia also is the thorny tamarisk, the same tree which grew around the body of Osiris. It was a sacred tree among the Arabs, who made of it the idol Al-Uzza, which Muhammad destroyed. It is abundant as a bush in the desert of Thur, and of it the crown of thorns was composed, which was set on the forehead of Jesus of Nazareth. It is a fit type of immortality on account of its tenacity of life, for it has been known, when planted as a doorpost, to take root again and shoot out budding boughs above the threshold. It is quite possible that much of the veneration accorded the acacia is due to the peculiar attributes of the mimosa or sensitive plant with which it was often identified by the ancients. There is a Coptic legend to the effect that the sensitive plant was the first of all trees or shrubs to worship Christ. The rapid growth of the acacia and its beauty have also caused it to be regarded as emblematic of fecundity and generation. The symbolism of the acacia is susceptible of four distinct interpretations. One, it is the emblem of the vernal equinox, the annual resurrection of the solar deity. Two, under the form of the sensitive plant which shrinks from human touch, the acacia signifies purity and innocence, as one of the Greek meanings of its name implies. Three, it fittingly typifies human immortality and regeneration, and under the form of the evergreen represents that immortal part of man which survives the destruction of his visible nature. Four, It is the ancient and revered emblem of the mysteries and candidates entering the tortuous passageways in which these ceremonials were given carried in their hands branches of these sacred plants or small clusters of sanctified flowers. Albert G. Mackey calls attention to the fact that each of the ancient mysteries had its own peculiar plant sacred to the gods or goddesses in whose honor the rituals were celebrated. These sacred plants were later adopted as the symbols of the various degrees in which they were used. Thus, in the mysteries of Adonis, lettuce was sacred. In the Brahmin and Egyptian rites, the lotus. Among the Druids, the mistletoe. And among certain of the Greek mysteries, the myrtle. As the legend of Shirama is based upon the ancient Egyptian mystery ritual of the murder and resurrection of Osiris, it is natural that the sprig of Acacia should be preserved as symbolic of the resurrection of Shira. The chest containing the body of Osiris was washed ashore near Byblos and lodged in the roots of a tamarisk or acacia, which, growing into a mighty tree, enclosed within its trunk the body of the murdered god. This is undoubtedly the origin of the story that a sprig of acacia marks the grave of Shira. The mystery of the evergreen marking the grave of the dead sun god is also perpetuated in the Christmas tree. The apricot and quince or quince are familiar Ionic symbols, while the bunch of grapes and the fig are phallic. The pomegranate is the mystic fruit of the Eleusinian rites. By eating it, Proserpine bound herself to the reals of Pluto. The fruit here signifies the sensuous life which, once tasted, temporarily deprives man of immortality. Also, on account of its vast number of seeds, the pomegranate was often employed to represent natural fecundity. For the same reason, Jacob Bryant, in his ancient mythology, notes that the ancients recognized in this fruit an appropriate emblem of the Ark of the Deluge, which contained the seeds of the new human race. Among the ancient mysteries, the pomegranate was also considered to be a divine symbol of such peculiar significance that its true explanation could not be divulged. It was termed by the Kabiri the forbidden secret. Many Greek gods and goddesses are depicted holding the fruit or flower of the pomegranate in their hands, evidently to signify that they are givers of life and plenty. Pomegranate capitals were placed upon the pillars of Jachin and Boaz, standing in front of King Solomon's temple. And by the order of Jehovah, pomegranate blossoms were embroidered upon the bottom of the high priest's ephod. The sunflower. From Kircher's Magnus Sive de Ars Magnetica Opus Tripartitum. The above diagram illustrates a curious experiment in plant magnetism, reproduced with several other experiments in Athanasius Kircher's rare volume of magnetism. Several plants were sacred to the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Hindus because of the peculiar effect which the sun exerted over them. As it is difficult for man to look upon the face of the sun without being blinded by the light, those plants which turned and deliberately faced the solar orb were considered typical of very highly advanced souls. Since the sun was regarded as the personification of the supreme deity, those forms of life over which it exercised marked influence were venerated as being sacred to divinity. The sunflower, because of its plainly perceptible affinity for the sun, was given high rank among sacred plants. Strong wine made from the juice of the grape was looked upon as symbolic of the false life and false light of the universe, for it was produced by a false process. Artificial fermentation. The rational faculties are clouded by strong drink, and the animal nature liberated from bondage controls the individual, facts which necessarily were of the greatest spiritual significance. As the lower nature is the eternal tempter seeking to co-lead man into excesses which inhibit the spiritual faculties, the grape and its product were used to symbolize the adversary. The juice of the grape was thought by the Egyptians to resemble human blood more closely than did any other substance. In fact, they believed that the grape secured its life from the blood of the dead who had been buried in the earth. According to Plutarch, the priests of the sun at Heliopolis never carry any wine into their temples. And if they made use of it at any time in their libations to the gods, it was not because they looked upon it as in its own nature acceptable to them, but they poured it upon their altars as the blood of those enemies who formerly had fought against them. For they look upon the vine to have first sprung out of the earth after it was fattened with the carcasses of those who fell in the wars against the gods. And this, say they, is the reason why drinking its juice in great quantities makes men mad and beside themselves, filling them as it were with the blood of their own ancestors. Among some cults, the state of intoxication was viewed as a condition somewhat akin to ecstasy, for the individual was believed to be possessed by the universal spirit of life, whose chosen vehicle was the vine. In the mysteries, the grape was often used to symbolize lust and debauchery because of its demoralizing effect upon the emotional nature. The fact was recognized, however, that fermentation was the certain evidence of the presence of the solar fire. Hence, the grape was accepted as the proper symbol of the solar spirit or the giver of divine enthusiasm. In a somewhat similar manner, Christians have accepted wine as the emblem of the blood of Christ, partaking of it in Holy Communion. Christ, the exoteric emblem of the solar spirit, said, "I am the vine." He was therefore worshipped with the wine of ecstasy in the same manner as were his pagan prototypes, Bacchus, Dionysus, Ares, and Adonis. The Mandragora officinarum, or Mandrake, is accredited with possessing the most remarkable magical powers. Its narcotic properties were recognized by the Greeks, who employed it to deaden pain during surgical operations, and it has been identified also with bauras, the mystic herb used by the Jews for casting out demons. In the Jewish wars, Josephus describes the method of securing the bauras, which he declares emits flashes of lightning and destroys all who seek to touch it unless they proceed according to certain rules supposedly formulated by King Solomon himself. The occult properties of the mandrake, while little understood, have been responsible for the adoption of the plant as a talisman capable of increasing the value or quantity of anything with which it was associated. As a phallic charm, the mandrake was considered to be an infallible cure for sterility. It was one of the priapic symbols which the Knights Templars were accused of worshiping. The root of the plant closely resembles a human body and often bore the outlines of the human head, arms, or legs. This striking similarity between the body of man and the mandragora is one of the puzzles of natural science and is the real basis for the veneration in which this plant was held. In Isis Unveiled, Madame Blavatsky notes that the mandragora seems to occupy upon Earth the point where the vegetable and animal kingdoms meet, as the zoophytes and polypi do in Die Sea. This thought opens a vast field of speculation concerning the nature of this animal plant. According to a popular superstition, the mandrake shrank from being touched and, crying out with a human voice, clung desperately to the soil in which it was embedded. Anyone who heard its cry while plucking it either immediately died or went mad. To circumvent this tragedy, it was customary to dig around the roots of the mandrake until the plant was thoroughly loosened, and then to tie one end of a cord about the stalk and fasten the other end to a dog. The dog, obeying his master's call, thereupon dragged the root from the earth and became the victim of the mandragora curse. When once uprooted, the plant could be handled with immunity. During the Middle Ages, Mandrake charms brought great prices, and an art was evolved by which the resemblance between the mandragora roots and the human body was considerably accentuated. Like most superstitions, the belief in the peculiar powers of the mandrake was founded upon an ancient secret doctrine concerning the true nature of the plant. It is slightly narcotic, says Eliphas Levi, and an aphrodisiacal virtue was ascribed to it by the ancients, who represented it as being sought by Thessalian sorcerers for the composition of field trees or field trays. Is this root the umbilical vestige of our terrestrial origin, as a certain magical mysticism has suggested? We dare not affirm it seriously, but it is true all the same that man issued from the slime of earth, and his first appearance must have been in the form of a rough sketch. The analogies of nature compel us to admit the notion at least as a possibility. The first men were, in this case, a family of gigantic, sensitive mandragores animated by the sun, who rooted themselves up from the earth. The homely onion was revered by the Egyptians as a symbol of the universe because its rings and layers represented the concentric planes into which creation was divided according to the Hermetic mysteries. It was also regarded as possessing great medicinal virtue. Because of peculiar properties resulting from its pungency, the garlic plant was a powerful agent in transcendental magic. To this day, no better medium has been found for the treatment of obsession, vampirism, and certain forms of insanity, especially those resulting from mediumship and the influences of elemental larvae. Respond immediately to the use of garlic. In the Middle Ages, its presence in a house was believed to ward off all evil powers. Trifoliate plants such as the shamrock were employed by many religious cults to represent the principle of the Trinity. St. Patrick is supposed to have used the shamrock to illustrate this doctrine of the triune divinity. The reason for the additional sanctity conferred by a fourth leaf is that the fourth principle of the Trinity is man, and the presence of this leaf therefore signifies the redemption of humanity. The Tree of Alchemy, from Museum Hermeticum, Reformatum et Amplificatum. The alchemists were meant to symbolize their metals by means of a tree, to indicate that all seven were branches dependent upon the single trunk of solar life. As the seven spirits depend upon God and are branches of a tree of which He is the root, trunk, and the spiritual earth from which the root derives its nourishment, so the single trunk of divine life and power nourishes all the multitudinous forms of which the universe is composed. In Gloria Mundi, from which the above illustration is reproduced, there is contained an important thought concerning the plant-like growth of metals. All trees, herbs, stones, metals, and minerals grow and attain to perfection without being necessarily touched by any human hand. For the seed is raised up from the ground, puts forth flowers, and bears fruit, simply through the agency of natural influences. As it is with plants, so it is with metals. While they lie in the heart of the earth in their natural ore, they grow and are developed day by day through the influence of the four elements. Their fire is the splendor of the sun and moon. The earth conceives in her womb the splendor of the sun, and by it the seeds of the metals are well and equally warmed, just like the grain in the fields. For as each tree of the field has its own peculiar shape, appearance, and fruit, so each mountain bears its own particular ore, those stones and that earth being the soil in which the metals grow. Wreaths were worn during initiation into the mysteries and the reading of the sacred books to signify that these processes were consecrated to the deities. On the symbolism of wreaths, Richard Payne Knight writes, instead of beads, wreaths of foliage, generally of laurel, olive, myrtle, ivy, or oak, appear upon coins, sometimes encircling the symbolical figures and sometimes as chaplets upon their heads. All these were sacred to some peculiar personifications of the deity and significant of some particular attributes, and in general, all evergreens were Dionysiac planes, that is, symbols of the generative power, signifying perpetuity of youth and vigor, as the circles of beads and diadems signify perpetuity of existence. Stones, metals, and gems. Each of the four primary elements, as taught by the early philosophers, has its analog in the quaternary terrestrial constitution of man. The rocks and earth correspond to the bones and flesh, the water to the various fluids, the air to the gases, and the fire to the bodily heat. Since the bones are the framework that sustains the corporeal structure, they may be regarded as a fitting emblem of the spirit, that divine foundation which supports the composite fabric of mind, soul, and body. To the initiate, the skeleton of death holding in bony fingers the reaper's scythe denotes Saturn or Kronos, the father of the gods, carrying the sickle with which he mutilated Ouranos, his own sire. In the language of the mysteries, the spirits of men are the powdered bones of Saturn. The latter deity was always worshipped under the symbol of the base or footing, inasmuch as he was considered to be the substructure upholding creation. The myth of Saturn has its historical basis in the fragmentary records preserved by the early Greeks and Phoenicians concerning a king by that name who ruled over the ancient continent of Hyperborea, Polaris, Hyperborea, and Atlantis, because they lie buried beneath the continents and oceans of the modern world, have frequently been symbolized as rocks supporting upon their broad surfaces new lands, races, and empires. According to the Scandinavian mysteries, the stones and cliffs were formed from the bones of Ymir, the primordial giant of the seething clay, while to the Hellenic mystics, the rocks were the bones of the great mother Gaia. After the deluge sent by the gods to destroy mankind at the close of the Iron Age, only Deucalion and Pyrrha were left alive. Entering a ruined sanctuary to pray, they were directed by an oracle to depart from the temple and, with heads veiled and garments unbound, cast behind them the bones of their mother. Constructing the cryptic message of the god to mean that the earth was the great mother of all creatures, Deucalion picked up loose rocks and, bidding Pyrrha to do likewise, cast them behind him. From these rocks there sprang forth a new and stalwart race of human beings, the rocks thrown by Deucalion becoming men and those thrown by Pyrrha becoming women. In this allegory is epitomized the mystery of human evolution, for spirit, by ensouling matter, becomes that indwelling power which gradually but sequentially raises the mineral to the status of the plant to the plane of the animal to the dignity of man, and man to the estate of the gods. The solar system was organized by forces operating inward from the great ring of the Saturnian sphere. And since the beginnings of all things were under the control of Saturn, the most reasonable inference is that the first forms of worship were dedicated to him and his peculiar symbol, the stone. Thus, the intrinsic nature of Saturn is synonymous with that spiritual rock, which is the enduring foundation of the solar temple and has its antitype or lower octave in that terrestrial rock, the planet Earth, which sustains upon its jagged surface the diversified genera of mundane life. Although its origin is uncertain, litholatry undoubtedly constitutes one of the earliest forms of religious expression. Throughout all the world, writes Godfrey Higgins, the first object of idolatry seems to have been a plain, unwrought stone placed in the ground as an emblem of the generative or procreative powers of nature. Remnants of stone worship are distributed over the greater part of the Earth's surface, a notable example being the menhirs of Karnak in Brittany, where several thousand gigantic uncut stones are arranged in 11 orderly rows. Many of these monoliths stand over 20 feet out of the sand in which they are embedded, and it has been calculated that some of the larger ones weigh as much as 250,000 pounds. By some, it is believed that certain of the menhirs mark the location of buried treasure, but the most plausible view is that which regards Karnak as a monument to the astronomical knowledge of antiquity. Scattered throughout the British Isles of Europe, these cairns, dolmens, menhirs, and sistahs stand as mute but eloquent testimonials to the existence and achievements of races now extinct. Of particular interest are the rocking or Logan stones, which evince the mechanical skill of these early people. These relics consist of enormous boulders poised upon one or two small points in such a manner that the slightest pressure will sway them, but the greatest effort is not sufficient to overthrow them. These were called living stones by the Greeks and Latins, the most famous one being the Gigorian stone in the Strait of Gibraltar. Though so perfectly balanced that it could be moved with the stalk of a daffodil, this rock could not be upset by the combined weight of many men. There is a legend that Hercules raised a rocking stone over the graves of the two sons of Boreas, whom he had killed in combat. This stone was so delicately poised that it swayed back and forth with the wind, but no application of force could overturn it. A number of Logan stones have been found in Britain. Traces of one no longer standing have been discovered in Stonehenge. It is interesting to note that the green stones forming the inner ring of Stonehenge are believed to have been brought from Africa. In many cases, the monoliths are without carving or inscription, for they undoubtedly antedate both the use of tools and the art of writing. In some instances, the stones have been trued into columns or obelisks, as in the runic monuments and the Hindu lingams and Sakti stones. In other instances, they are fashioned into rough likenesses of the human body, as in the Easter Island statues, or into the elaborately sculptured figures of the Central American Indians and the Khmers of Cambodia. The first rough stone images can hardly be considered as effigies of any particular deity, but rather as the crude effort of primitive man to portray in the enduring qualities of stone the procreative attributes of abstract divinity. An instinctive recognition of the stability of deity has persisted through all the intervening ages between primitive man and modern civilization. Ample proof of the survival of litholatry in the Christian faith is furnished by allusions to the rock of refuge, the rock upon which the Church of Christ was to be founded, the cornerstone which the builders rejected, Jacob's stony pillow, which he set up and anointed with oil, the sling stone of David, the rock Moriah, which the altar of King Solomon's temple was erected, the white stone of Revelation, and the rock of ages. Stones were highly venerated by prehistoric peoples primarily because of their usefulness. Jagged bits of stone were probably man's first weapons. Rocky cliffs and crags constituted his first fortifications, and from these vantage points, he hurled loose boulders down upon marauders. In caverns or rude huts fashioned from slabs of rock, the first humans protected themselves from the rigors of the elements. Stones were set up as markers and monuments to primitive achievement. They were also placed upon the graves of the dead, probably as a precautionary measure to prevent the depredations of wild beasts. During migrations, it was apparently customary for primitive peoples to carry about with them stones taken from their original habitat. At the homeland or birthplace of a race was considered sacred. These stones were emblematic of that universal regard shared by all nations for the place of their geniture. The discovery that fire could be produced by striking together two pieces of stone augmented man's reference for stones. But ultimately, the hitherto unsuspected world of wonders opened by the newly discovered element of fire caused pyrolatry to supplant stone worship. The dark, cold father stone gave birth out of itself to the bright, glowing sun fire, and the newly born flame, by displacing its parent, became the most impressive and mysterious of all religio-philosophic symbols, widespread and enduring through the ages. Saturn swallowing the stone substituted for Jupiter. From Catrari's Imagini Degli Antici. Saturn, having been warned by his parents that one of his own children would dethrone him, devoured each child at birth. At last, Rhea, his wife, in order to save Jupiter, her sixth child, substituted for him a rock enveloped in swaddling clothes, which Saturn, ignorant of the deception practiced upon him, immediately swallowed it. Jupiter was concealed on the island of Crete until he attained manhood, when he forced his father to disgorge the 5 children he had eaten. The stone swallowed by Saturn in lieu of his youngest son was placed by Jupiter at Delphi, where it was held in great veneration and was daily anointed. The body of everything was likened to a rock, trued either into a cube or more ornately chiseled to form a pedestal, while the spirit of everything was likened to the elaborately carved figure surmounting it. Accordingly, altars were erected as a symbol of the lower world, and fires were kept burning upon them to represent that spiritual essence illuminating the body it surmounted. The square is actually one surface of a cube, its corresponding figure in plane geometry, and its proper philosophic symbol. Consequently, when considering the earth as an element and not as a body, the Greeks, Brahmins, and Egyptians always referred to its 4 corners, although they were fully aware that the planet itself was a sphere. Because their doctrines were the sure foundation of all knowledge and the first step in the attainment of conscious immortality, the mysteries were often represented as cubical or pyramidal stones. Conversely, these stones themselves became the emblem of that condition of self-achieved godhood. The unchangeability of the stone made it an appropriate emblem of God, the immovable and unchangeable source of existence, and also of the divine sciences, the eternal revelation of himself to mankind. As the personification of the rational intellect, which is the true foundation of human life, Mercury or Hermes was symbolized in a like manner. Square or cylindrical pillars surmounted by a bearded head of Hermes and called Herme or Hermi were set up in public places. Terminus, a form of Jupiter and god of boundaries and highways, from whose name is derived the modern world terminal, ornamented with the head of the god, which was placed at the borders of provinces and the intersections of important roads. The philosopher's stone is really the philosophical stone, for philosophy is truly likened to a magic jewel whose touch transmutes base substances into priceless gems like itself. Wisdom is the Okay. The tablets of the law. While upon the heights of Mount Sinai, Moses received from Jehovah 2 tablets bearing the characters of the Decalogue, traced by the very finger of Israel's God. These tables were fashioned from the divine sapphire, what is that, Skepia, which the Most High, after removing from his own throne, had cast into the abyss to become the foundation and generator of the worlds. This sacred stone, formed of heavenly dew, was sundered by the breath of God, and upon the 2 parts were drawn in black fire the figures of the law. These precious inscriptions, aglow with celestial splendor, were delivered by the Lord on the Sabbath day into the hands of Moses, who was able to read the illumined letters from the reverse side because of the transparency of the great jewel. See the Secret Doctrine in Israel or the Zohar for details of this legend. The 10 Commandments are the 10 shining gems placed by the Holy One in the sapphire sea of being. And in the depths of matter, the reflections of these jewels are seen as the laws governing the sublunary spheres. They are the sacred 10 by which the supreme deity has stamped his will upon the face of nature. This same decad was celebrated by the Pythagoreans under the form of the tetrasis, that triangle of spermatic points which reveals to the initiated the whole working of the cosmic scheme. For 10 is the number of perfection, the key to creation, and the proper symbol of God, man, and the universe. Because of the idolatry of the Israelites, Moses deemed the people unworthy to receive the sapphire tables. Hence, he destroyed them, that the mysteries of Jehovah should not be violated. For the original set, Moses substituted 2 tables of rough stone, into the surface of which he had cut 10 ancient letters. While the former tables, partaking of the divinity of the tree of life, blazed forth eternal verities, the latter, partaking of the nature of the tree of good and evil, revealed only temporal truths. Thus, the ancient tradition of Israel returned again to heaven, leaving only its shadow with the children of the 12 tribes. Moses receiving the tables of law from an old Bible. Moses Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher of the 12th century, in describing the tables of the law written by the finger of God, divides all productions into 2 general orders: products of nature and products of art. God works through nature and man through art. He asserts in his guide for the perplexed. Thus, the word of the Lord is the hand or active principle by which the wheel of the Creator is traced upon the face of his creation. The Tanaim, or initiates of the Jewish mystery school, alone possess the complete understanding of the significance of the 10 Commandments. These laws are esoterically related to the 10 degrees of contemplation constituting the path of ecstasy, which winds upward through the 4 worlds and ends in the effulgence of Ein Sof. One of the 2 tables of stone delivered by the lawgiver to his followers stood for the oral, the other for the written traditions upon which the rabbinical school was founded. Authorities differ widely as to the size and substance of the inferior tables. Some describe them as being so small that they could be held in the hollow of a man's hand. Others declare that each table was 10 or 12 cubits in length and of enormous weight. A few even deny that the tables were of stone, maintaining that they were of a wood called cedar, which, according to the Mohammedans, grows profusely in paradise. The 2 tables signify respectively the superior and inferior worlds, the paternal and the maternal formative principles. In their undivided state, they represent the cosmic androgyny. The breaking of the tables signifies obscurely the separation of the superior and the inferior spheres, and also the division of the sexes. In the religious processionals of the Greeks and Egyptians, an ark or ship was carried which contained stone tablets, combs, and vessels of various shapes, emblematic of the procreative processes. The Ark of the Israelites, which was patterned after the sacred chest of the Isiac mysteries, contained three holy objects, each having an important phallic interpretation: the pot of manna, the rod that budded, and the tablets of the law, the first, second, and third principles of the creative triad. The manna, the blossoming staff, and the stone tables are also appropriate images, respectively, of the Kabbalah, the Mishnah, and the written law, the spirit, soul, and body of Judaism. When placed in King Solomon's everlasting house, the Ark of the Covenant contained only the tablets of the law. Does this indicate that even at that early date, the secret tradition had been lost and the letter of the revelation alone remained? As representing the power that fabricated the lower or demiurgic sphere, the tablets of stone were sacred to Jehovah, in contradistinction to the tablets of sapphire that signified the potency that established the higher or celestial sphere. Without doubt, the Mosaic tablets have their prototype in the stone pillars or obelisks placed on either side of the entrance to pagan temples. These columns may pertain to that remote time when men worshiped the Creator through his zodiacal sign of Gemini, the sign of which is still the phallic pillars of the celestial twins. The Ten Commandments, writes Hargrave Jennings, are inscribed in two groups of 5 each, in columnar form. The 5 to the right, looking from the altar, mean the law. The 5 to the left mean the prophets. The right stone is masculine, the left stone is feminine. They correspond to the 2 disjoint pillars of stone or towers in the front of every cathedral and of every temple in heathen times. See the Rosicrucians, Their Rites and Mysteries. The same author states that the law is masculine because it was delivered direct from the deity, while the prophets or gospels were feminine because born through the nature of man. The right tablet of the law further signifies Jachin, the white pillar of light, the left tablet Boaz, the shadowy pillar of darkness. These were the names of the 2 pillars cast from brass set up on the porch of King Solomon's temple. They were 18 cubits in height and beautifully ornamented with wreaths of chainwork, nets, and pomegranates. On the top of each pillar was a large bowl, now erroneously called a ball or globe, one of the bowls probably containing fire and the other water. The celestial globe, originally the bowl of fire, surmounting the right-hand column, Joachim, symbolized the divine man. The terrestrial globe, the bowl of water, surmounting the left-hand column, Boaz, signified the earthly man. These 2 pillars respectively connote also the active and the passive expressions of divine energy, the sun and the moon, sulfur and salt, good and bad, light and darkness. Between them is the door leading into the house of God, and standing thus at the gates of sanctuary, they are a reminder that Jehovah is both an androgynous and an anthropomorphic deity. As 2 parallel columns, they denote the zodiacal signs of Cancer and Capricorn, which were formerly placed in the chamber of initiation to represent birth and death, the extremes of physical life. They accordingly signify the summer and the winter solstices, now known to Freemasons under the comparatively modern appellation of the 2 St. Johns. In the mysterious Sephirothic tree of the Jews, these 2 pillars symbolize mercy and severity. Standing before the gate of King Solomon's temple, these columns had the same symbolic import as the obelisk before the sanctuaries of Egypt. When interpreted Kabbalistically, the names of the 2 pillars mean, in strength shall my house be established. In the splendor of mental and spiritual illumination, the high priest stood between the pillars as a mute witness to the perfect virtue of equilibrium, that hypothetical point equidistant from all extremes. He thus personified the divine nature of man in the midst of his compound constitution, the mysterious Pythagorean monad in the presence of the duad. On one side towered the stupendous column of the intellect, on the other the brazen pillar of the flesh. Midway between these two stands the glorified wise man, but he cannot reach this high estate without first suffering upon the cross made by joining these pillars together. The early Jews occasionally represented the two pillars, Jachin and Boaz, as the legs of Jehovah, thereby signifying to the modern philosopher that wisdom and love, in their most exalted sense, support the whole order of creation, both mundane and supermundane. The Holy Grail, like the sapphire Sistahs, the lapis exilis, crown jewel of the archangel Lucifer, fell from heaven. Michael, archangel of the sun and the hidden God of Israel, at the head of the angelic host, swooped down upon Lucifer and his legions of rebellious spirits. During the conflict, Michael, with his flaming sword, struck the flashing lapis exilis from the coronet of his adversary, and the green stone fell through all the celestial rings into the dark and immeasurable abyss. Out of Lucifer's radiant gem was fashioned the Sangreal, or Holy Grail, from which Christ is said to have drunk at the Last Supper. Though some controversy exists to whether the grail was a cup or a platter, it is generally depicted in art as a chalice of considerable size and unusual beauty. According to the legend, Joseph of Arimathea brought the grail cup to the place of the crucifixion, and in it caught the blood pouring from the wounds of the dying Nazarene. Later, Joseph, who had become custodian of the sacred relics, the Sangreal and the spear of Longinus, carried them into a distant country. According to one version, his descendants finally placed these relics in Glastonbury Abbey in England. According to another, in a wonderful castle on Mount Salvet, Spain, built by angels in a single night. Under the name of Preston John Parsifal, the last of the Grail kings, carried the holy cup with him into India, and it disappeared forever from the Western world. Subsequent search for the Sangreal was the motive for much of the knight errantry of the Arthurian legends and the ceremonials of the Round Table. No adequate interpretation has ever been given to the Grail mysteries. Some believe the Knights of the Holy Grail to have been a powerful organization of Christian mystics perpetuating the ancient wisdom under the rituals and sacraments of the oracular cup. The quest for the Holy Grail is the eternal search for truth, and Albert G. Mackey sees in it a variation of the Masonic legend of the lost word so long sought by the brethren of the craft. There is also evidence to support the claim that the story of the Grail is an elaboration of an early pagan nature myth, which has been preserved by reason of the subtle manner in which it was engrafted upon the cults of Christianity. From this particular viewpoint, the Holy Grail is undoubtedly a type of the ark or vessel in which the life of the world is preserved, and therefore is significant of the body of the Great Mother or nature. Its green color relates it to Venus and to the mystery of generation, also to the Islamic faith, whose sacred color is green and whose Sabbath is Friday, the day of Venus. The Holy Grail is a symbol both of the lower or irrational world and of the bodily nature of man, because both are receptacles for the living essences of the superior worlds. Such is the mystery of the redeeming blood, which, descending into the condition of death, overcomes the last enemy by ensouling all substance with its own immortality. To the Christian, whose mystic faith especially emphasizes the love element, the Holy Grail typifies the heart, in which continually swirls the living water of eternal life. Moreover, to the Christian, the search for the Holy Grail is the search for the real self, which, when found, is the consummation of the magnum opus. The Holy Cup can be discovered only by those who have raised themselves above the limitations of sensuous existence. In his mystic poem, The Vision of Sir Launfal. James Russell Lowell discloses the true nature of the Holy Grail by showing that it is visible only to a certain state of spiritual consciousness. Only upon returning from the vain pursuit of haughty ambition did the aged and broken knight see in the transformed leper's cup the glowing chalice of his lifelong dream. Some writers trace a similarity between the Grail legend and the stories of the martyred sun gods whose blood, descending from heaven into the earth, was caught in the cup of matter and liberated there from the initiatory rites. The Holy Grail may also be the seed pod so frequently employed in the ancient mysteries as an emblem of germination and resurrection. And if the cup-like shape of the grail be derived from the flower, it signifies the regeneration and spiritualization of the generative forces in man. There are many accounts of stone images which, because of the substances entering into their composition and the ceremonials attendant upon their construction, were ensouled by the divinities whom they were created to resemble. To such images were ascribed various human faculties and powers, such as speech, thought, and even motion. While renegade priests doubtless resorted to trickery, an instance of which is related in a curious apocryphal fragment entitled Baal and the Dragon, and supposedly deleted from the end of the book of Daniel. Many of the phenomena recorded in connection with sanctified statues and relics can hardly be explained unless the work of supernatural agencies be admitted. History records the existence of stones which, when struck, threw all who heard the sound into a state of ecstasy. There were also echoing images which whispered for hours after the room itself had become silent, and musical stones productive of the sweetest harmonies. In recognition of the sanctity which the Greeks and Latins ascribed to stones, they placed their hands upon certain consecrated pillars when taking an oath. In ancient times, stones played a part in determining the fate of accused persons, for it was customary for juries to reach their verdicts by dropping pebbles into a bag. Divination by stones was often resorted to by the Greeks, and Helena is said to have foretold by lithomancy the destruction of Troy. Many popular superstitions about stones survived the so-called Dark Ages. Chief among these is the one concerning the famous black stone in the seat of the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey, which is declared to be the actual rock used by Jacob as a pillow. The black stone also appears several times in religious symbolism. It was called Heliogabalus, a word presumably derived from Elagabal, the Syro-Phoenician sun god. This stone was sacred to the sun and declared to possess great and diversified properties. The black stone in the Kaaba at Mecca is still revered throughout the Mohammedan world. It is said to have been white originally and of such brilliancy that it could be seen many days a journey from Mecca, but as ages passed, it became blackened by the tears of pilgrims and the sins of the world. The magic of metals and gems. According to the teachings of the mysteries, the rays of the celestial bodies striking the crystallizing influences of the lower world become the various elements. Partaking of the astral virtues of their source, these elements neutralize certain unbalanced forms of celestial activity and, when properly combined, contribute much to the well-being of man. Little is known today concerning these magical properties, but the modern world may yet find it profitable to consider the findings of the early philosophers who determined these relationships by extensive experimentation. Out of such research arose the practice of identifying the metals with the bones of the various deities. For example, the Egyptians, according to Manetho, considered iron to be the bone of Mars and the lodestone the bone of Horus. By analogy, lead would be the physical skeleton of Saturn, copper of Venus, quicksilver of Mercury, gold of the sun, silver of the moon, and antimony of the earth. It is possible that uranium will prove to be the metal of Uranus and radium to be the metal of Neptune. Examples of Hermes from Christie's Disquisitions upon the Painted Greek Vases. The primitive custom of worshiping the gods in the form of heaps of stones gave place to the practice of erecting phallic pillars or cones in their honor. These columns differed widely in size and appearance. Some were of gigantic proportions and were richly ornamented with inscriptions or likenesses of gods and heroes. Others, like the votive offerings of the Babylonians, were but a few inches high without ornament and merely bore a brief statement of the purpose for which they had been prepared, or a hymn to the god of the temple in which they were placed. These small baked clay cones were identical in their symbolic meaning with the large Hermes set up by the roadside and in other public places. Later, the upper end of the column was surmounted by a human head. Often two projections or tenons corresponding to shoulders were placed on one on either side to support the wreaths of flowers adorning the columns. Offerings, usually of food, were placed near the Hermes. Occasionally, these columns were used to uphold roofs and were numbered among the art objects ornamenting the villas of wealthy Romans. The four ages of the Greek mystics, the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, are metaphoric expressions referring to the four major periods in the life of all things. In the divisions of the day, they signify dawn, midday, sunset, and midnight. In the duration of gods, men, and universes, they denote the periods of birth, growth, maturity, and decay. The Greek ages also bear a close correspondence to the four yugas of the Hindus: Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Their method of calculation is described by Ulamudian as follows. In each of the 12 signs, there are 1800 minutes. Multiply this number by 12, you have 21,600. 1800 times 12 equals 21,600. Multiply this 21,600 by 80, and it will give you 1,728,000, which is the duration of the first age called Krita Yuga. If the same number be multiplied by 60, it will give you 1,296,000, the years of the second age, Treta Yuga. The same number multiplied by 40 gives 864,000, the length of the third age, Dvapara Yuga. The same multiplied by 20 gives 432,000, the fourth age, Kali Yuga. It will be noted that these multipliers decrease in inverse ratio to Pythagorean tetraces 1, 2, 3, and 4. H.P. Blavatsky declares that Orpheus taught his followers how to affect a whole audience by means of a lodestone, and that Pythagoras paid particular attention to the color and nature of precious stones. She adds, the Buddhists assert that the sapphire produces peace of mind, equanimity, and chases all evil thoughts by establishing a healthy circulation in man. So does an electric battery with its well-directed fluid, say our electricians. The sapphire, say the Buddhists, will open barred doors and dwellings for the spirit of man. It produces a desire for prayer and brings with it more peace than any other gem. But he who would wear it must lead a pure and holy life. Mythology abounds with accounts of magical rings and talismanic jewels. In the second book of his Republic, Plato describes a ring which, when the collet was turned inward, rendered its wearer invisible. With this, Gyges, the shepherd, secured for himself the throne of Lydia. Josephus also describes magical rings designed by Moses and King Solomon, and Aristotle mentions one which brought love and honor to its possessor. In his chapter dealing with the subject, Henry Cornelius Agrippa not only mentions the same rings, but states, upon the authority of Philostratus Jarcus, that Apollonius of Tyana extended his life to over 20 years with the aid of 7 magical rings presented to him by an East Indian prince. Each of these 7 rings was set with a gem partaking of the nature of one of the 7 ruling planets of the week, and by daily changing the rings, Apollonius protected himself against sickness and death by the intervention of the planetary influences. The philosopher also instructed his disciples in the virtues of these talismanic jewels, considering such information to be indispensable to the theurgist. Agrippa describes the preparation of magical rings as follows. When any star or planet ascends fortunately with the fortunate aspect of or conjunction of the moon, we must take a stone and herb that is under that star and make a ring of the metal that is suitable to this star, and in it fasten the stone, putting the herb or root under it, not omitting the inscriptions of images, names, and characters, as also the proper suffumigations. See 3 books of occult philosophy. The ring has also been regarded as the symbol of attainment, perfection, and immortality, the last because the circlet of precious metal had neither beginning nor end. In the mysteries, rings chased to resemble a serpent with its tail in its mouth were worn by the initiates as material evidence of the position reached by them in the order. Signet rings engraved with certain secret emblems were worn by the Hierophants, and it was not uncommon for a messenger to prove that he was the official representative of a prince or other dignitary by bringing with his message either an impression from his master's ring or the signet itself. The wedding ring originally was intended to imply that in the nature of the one who wore it, the state of equilibrium and completion had been attained. This plain band of gold therefore bore witness of the union of the higher self or God with the lower self, nature, and the ceremony consummating this indissoluble blending of divinity and humanity in the one nature of the initiated mystic constituted the hermetic marriage of the mysteries. The Pythagorean signet ring from Cartari's Imaginae Degli de Degli Antichi. The number 5 was peculiarly associated by the Pythagoreans with the art of healing, and the pentagram or 5-pointed star was to them the symbol of health. I mean the 6-pointed star? The above figure represents a magical ring set with a talisman gem bearing the pentalpha or star formed by the 5 different positions of the Greek alpha. On this subject, Mackey writes, the disciples of Pythagoras, who were indeed its real inventors, placed within each of its interior angles one of the letters of the Greek word ia, or the Latin one, salus, both of which signify health, and thus it was made the talisman of health. They placed it at the beginning of their epistles as a greeting to invoke a secure health to their correspondent. But its use was not confined to the disciples of Pythagoras. As a talisman, it was employed all over the East as a charm to resist evil spirits. In describing the regalia of a magician, Eliphaz Levi declares that on Sunday, the day of the sun, he should carry in his right hand a golden wand set with a ruby or chrysolite. On Monday, the day of the moon, he should wear a collar of 3 strands consisting of pearls, crystals, and selenites. On Tuesday, the day of Mars, he should carry a wand of magnetized steel and a ring of the same metal set with an amethyst. On Wednesday, the day of Mercury, he should wear a necklace of pearls or glass beads containing Mercury, and a ring set with an agate or agate. On Thursday, the day of Jupiter, he should carry a wand of glass or resin and wear a ring set with an emerald or a sapphire. On Friday, the day of Venus, he should carry a wand of polished copper and wear a ring set with a turquoise and a crown or diadem decorated with lapis lazuli and beryl. And on Saturday, the day of Saturn, he should carry a wand ornamented with onyx stone and wear a ring set with onyx and a chain about the neck formed of lead. See the magical ritual of the Sanctum Regnum. Paracelsus, Agrippa, Kircher, Lilly, and numerous other magicians and astrologers have tabulated the gems and stones corresponding to the various planets and zodiacal signs. The following list has been compiled from their writings. To the sun is assigned the carbuncle, ruby, garnet, especially the pyrope, and other fiery stones, sometimes the diamond. To the moon, the pearl, selenite, and other forms of crystal. To Saturn, the onyx, jasper, topaz, and sometimes the lapis lazuli. To Jupiter, the sapphire, emerald, and marble. To Mars, the amethyst, hyacinth, lodestone, sometimes the diamond. To Venus, the turquoise, beryl, emerald, and sometimes the pearl, alabaster, coral, and carnelian. To Mercury, the chrysolite, agate, and variegated marble. To the zodiac, the same authorities assigned the following gems and stones. To Aries, the sardonyx, bloodstone, amethyst, and diamond. To Taurus, the carnelian, turquoise, hyacinth, sapphire, moss agate, and emerald. To Gemini, the topaz, agate, chrysoprase, crystal, and aquamarine. To Cancer, the topaz, chalcedony, black onyx, moonstone, pearl, cat's eye, crystal, and sometimes the emerald. To Leo, the jasper, sardonyx, beryl, ruby, chrysolite, amber, tourmaline, sometimes the diamond. To Virgo, the emerald, chameleon, jade, chrysolite, and sometimes the pink jasper and hyacinth. To Libra, the beryl, sardius, coral, lapis lazuli, opal, and sometimes the diamond. To Scorpio, the amethyst, beryl, sardonyx, aquamarine, carbuncle, lodestone, topaz, and malachite. To Sagittarius, dihyacinth, topaz, chrysolite, emerald, carbuncle, and turquoise. To Capricorn, the chrysoprase, ruby, malachite, black onyx, white onyx, jet, and moonstone. To Aquarius, the crystal, sapphire, garnet, zircon, and opal. To Pisces, the sapphire, jasper, chrysolite, moonstone, and amethyst. Both the magic mirror and the crystal ball are symbols little understood. Woe to that benighted mortal who accepts literally the stories circulated concerning them. He will discover, often at the cost of sanity and health, that sorcery and philosophy, while often confused, have nothing in common. The Persian Magi carried mirrors as an emblem of the material sphere, which reflects divinity from its every part. The crystal ball, long misused as a medium for the cultivation of physical powers, is a threefold symbol. One, it signifies the crystalline or universal egg in whose transparent depths creation exists. Two, it is a proper figure of deity previous to its immersion in matter. Three, it signifies the etheric sphere of the world in whose translucent essences is impressed and preserved the perfect image of all terrestrial activity. Meteors or rocks from heaven were considered tokens of divine favor and enshrined as evidence of a pact between the gods and the community in which they fell. Curiously marked or chipped natural stones are occasionally found. In China, there is a slab of marble, the grain of which forms a perfect likeness of the Chinese dragon. The Oberum Mergah stone, chipped by nature into a close resemblance to the popular conception of the face of Christ, is so remarkable that even the crowned heads of Europe requested the privilege of beholding it. Stones of such nature were held in the highest esteem among primitive peoples, and even today exert a wide influence upon the religiously minded. All right, that's it for now. Catch me back later for the ceremonial magic and sorcery. Thanks again for listening. Peace out.